is Yolanda Fair, and I'm the project attorney with the Office of the Juvenile Defender. It is my pleasure to have some awesome attorneys and advocates from Disability Rights North Carolina here today to talk to us about some of the behavioral concerns that we see in our clients. We've entitled this training, It's Not Just Behavioral, because they're going to talk to us a little bit about some of the invisible disabilities that our clients may have and that could lead to school discipline issues. I'm going to introduce our speakers. Our first speaker is Janu Coste. Janu is now with the Attorney General's office, but just a couple weeks ago, she was with the Disability Rights of North Carolina. We so appreciate her coming back for this presentation. But before joining the AG's office, she was worked with DRNC since 2019, I believe, and she was the agency's first Equal Justice Works Fellow there. Her work there focused on civil rights of children living in psychiatric residential treatment facilities. She graduated from the Campbell University School of Law in 2019, where she was a member of the nationally ranked trial advocacy team and served as the associate editor of the Campbell Law Observer. 2 of her 3 children are autistic, and that is one of the reasons why she went into the work that she did. She lives in the Triangle, and she has a therapy rabbit, which I thought was a cool fact, and a cat, and lives with her husband there. We also have Kirby Morrow, who is an advocate for Disability Rights North Carolina. She joined the organization in 2021 as an intake advocate, but she worked with the organization before that role in 2010 as well. She worked there from 2010 to 2012 on the kids team as an advocate. A lot of her work it includes providing resources to folks who call in. She helps them kind of route them to the best resources for them. She's worked as an advocate for over 30 years. She has her master's degree in social work and has over 30 years of working with children and families. Her experience is very, very diverse and includes grant writing, creating permanent housing programs for 100 families, and also working as a post-adoption specialist. And so we're so thankful to have her here. And we also have Lisa Nesbitt, who joined DRNC in 2012. She was promoted in 2020 to supervising attorney for the community inclusion team. In addition to overseeing that team, she helps children and adults obtain necessary medical services, including mental health and developmental disabilities. She received her bachelor's degree from Cook College at Rutgers and her law degree from George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And she practiced law with several private firms in Washington and New Jersey before taking time off to raise 3 children. But we're grateful to have all these speakers, and I will turn it over to them.
Okay, so I'm going to kick it off. We're happy to be here today with you guys. I hope we can give you some really good practical knowledge. I'm going to give you like a 2-minute background on who Disability Rights North Carolina is in case you don't know. We are the state's protection and advocacy organization. There is an outfit like us in every state and every territory in the country. We're federally funded, and we are mandated to protect the legal rights of people with disabilities, whether it's physical disabilities, mental health disabilities, intellectual developmental disabilities. Just so you know, the PNA system was created in the early 70s after Geraldo Rivera, for those of you who are old enough to remember, went into a school in New York called Willowbrook. He went in undercover, and the pictures that he came out with, the videos were so awful and horrific, it created a hue and cry across the country, and Congress acted to create the PNA system that we have now. Our services are always free. They're not income-based. Anybody can call us and ask for advice or help. We do everything from bring suit on behalf of one of our clients in federal or state court to just giving brief advice to saying, hey, we don't do that, but here's some resources that might help you. We work in education, employment, housing, criminal justice. We're in jails and prisons, Medicaid, housing, maybe I said that. And we also have broad access authority granted by the federal government to investigate and monitor wherever we suspect abuse or neglect. And I want to emphasize, we are not a state agency. We are not affiliated with the state of North Carolina. We are completely separate, federally funded nonprofit. And again, our services are free. Just can't say that enough. Our services are free. So with that, I'm going to let Kirby, I think, take it away. And I just want to say before we get started, Kirby has the most extensive knowledge of the service system here in North Carolina of anybody I have ever met. And so we are so lucky to have her here.
Thank you. And I did practice sharing my screen in advance, so I think I got this. All right, so I'm going to share my screen for our PowerPoint. And, oh, did it share? It didn't share. There we go. All right. Can I get a thumbs up if we can see this? Yay.
Yeah.
My technologically challenged self is always proud when I can do something like this. All right, so we're going to start just kind of talking about like what we often face when we're working with kids that are in difficult situations, may have been adjudicated, and what a lot of the things are underneath what you're experiencing or what their experiences have been, why they tend to maybe get adjudicated. And we'll start with that behavior is communication. So when we're talking about behaviors, this is sort of an overview, like what is an invisible disability? So post-traumatic stress disorder, most mental health disorders, autism can be invisible. It just depends on the functioning and your knowledge of autism as to whether that's something that you might be able to identify very quickly. How do you access these services? So that's like that's the biggest piece to this, is what services are out there, what we can access, and how do we do that in the least restrictive environment. Adjudicating kids is, I know, never easy, and sometimes defending them is very difficult because they'll tend to stack things on top of each other with some of their behaviors. And so sometimes those things are escalating, but they're usually escalating for a reason. And so keeping that in mind, and what treatments are available through the Medicaid system, and practices that practice considerations, building blocks for defense of juveniles and with invisible disabilities. So that part will be gone over more by Janu and Lisa. I can tell you that a lot of times when we would have callers, when I was doing intake, oftentimes I would get, people would send attorneys to me to have discussions about clients that they might have that have one of the more invisible disabilities, or to discuss, the array of services and maybe, the potential for whatever has happened to them to have impacted their actions or behaviors. And that's happened with juveniles and adults. And there are times where, we can do assists, and we do assist, and we do so in combination. So I worked with Janu on a case, and we supported a juvenile that was, wrongfully, well, not wrongfully necessarily being adjudicated, but was not competent. And so we'll talk some more about the competency and the capacity for clients to proceed later in this presentation. So when it's just behavioral, it's always more. All behavior is communication, and that's really important to know, that there's always an underlying reason. And I would say when we're looking at these disorders, ADHD, oppositional defiant, dysmorphic mood dysregulation disorder, fetal alcohol spectrum, autism spectrum, intellectual developmental disabilities, specific learning disabilities, and PTSD, a lot of times all of these are really this. A lot of times all the other disorders can look very much like trauma, and are trauma. That is it. So how do we work with that? We know that a lot of times the backgrounds of our clients can be very diverse and difficult. And so fetal alcohol syndrome is one that we see a lot. They usually fall in the borderline intellectual functioning range. which then a lot of times people will say, well, then they don't have an intellectual disability. That isn't the gauge. There are other gauges for how we identify somebody with an intellectual developmental disability. I have people that have 150 IQ that can't do activities of daily living, can't do self-care needs, can't take care of any of their personal or social needs. So you can have a very high IQ, you can have a borderline IQ, and still you are unable to match to your same age peers. I think that this is really important, adaptive functioning, and we'll get into like the different assessments and things like that that need to be done for our clients. But I think it's really important to state that these are common. Black and brown children are disproportionately going to be given punitive or behavioral consequences or adjudicated over cared for or treated. A good example of that would be one of our previous attorneys that did her dissertation, her doctoral thesis on kids with learning disabilities in juvenile detention centers. She did this in Memphis at two of the toughest treatment facility juvenile detention centers in the country. And she tested, all of them volunteered. I should start with that. And over 96% of them had an intellectual or developmental disability or a learning disability of some type. That is a really staggering statistic. They were missed for the needed services early on. And again, their behavior was communicating something that other people may not have seen. So I had a young man that I worked with in Oakland. He was acting out. The teacher calls me and I told him to cut it out, which he did. When you have a good rapport with your clients, it doesn't take much to really kind of de-escalate the situation. Let me find out what's happening. And they'd asked him to read a paragraph. He did not know how to read. He was in the 8th grade. He had been passed through over and over and over again without that ability. So what did he do? He acted out in class and got in trouble because he was embarrassed and he didn't want anybody to know. So I think that that's really important. People with autism, if they're having behaviors in school or in a public place and a police officer happens to get involved or an SRO officer and they put hands on these kids, you're going to probably trigger a response. When we're talking about trauma, we're talking about the fight or flight brain, the part of your brain that's the limbic system that gauges your responses. When you feel trapped, when you feel unable to, you're not being heard, you can't make your own point, you can't defend yourself. That is another reason that you might see like a disproportionate or an extreme reaction. They're fighting, they go right into that part of their brain because that part of their brain is being activated. Probably in the home or in the school or in some type of setting, they have experienced traumatic events and they can't necessarily step out of it as easily as you would like for them to. So we want them to calm down, but usually what that means is a little bit of space, slow everything down. Their processing speed may not be the same as, we're talking to them and asking them to do a task. That doesn't mean that they can do it right away. So that's why when we get to the part about the assessments and the testing, that's really important information for anybody working with these youth to know in advance, because it might be 24 hours before they can respond to what you were asking of them the day before. And what I often do is I use a written, I know to be brief with my questions, and that I use written and oral language. I'll write these down for you. You don't have to respond to me right now, but I would like to have a conversation with you later. I'd like for you to look these questions over. Do you have any trouble with these questions? Do you understand what I'm asking? Keeping it short, letting them know that there's no judgment, there's no pressure on them to do it right then and right there. But these are a lot of the issues that we see or that we are told. And oppositional defiant, I mean, it's so overused, it's ridiculous. I'm oppositional defiant. I say this all the time. I'm like, I don't understand what that means. I'm not going to sit back and just take it, from somebody. And so these kids, they get those diagnoses the minute that they say no to an adult. They can be given that and be seen as uncooperative. And I'm going to go through about 4 or 5 slides, and then we're going to see if there's questions. I just want to say that because I know that there may be questions coming in. I can't see anything except for 3 faces currently.
Kirby, I just wanted to say, I threw this slide in. I don't know if you actually saw it, but I just wanted to put this in because I'm a visual learner, so I just put this in because what you said is that so many of these symptoms also overlap, right? Like what we see is quote unquote these behaviors, they overlap. So the kid might have a particular diagnosis, but I wanted to just demonstrate, that these are a lot of times you'll see a child with multiple diagnoses from the DSM-5. It just means that that child's behavior can fit into several different profiles. And so these are just images just to show that clinically there are, if you have Venn diagrams, a lot of these intersect. So just a caution not to get so hung up on the particular diagnoses, but rather thinking through, what does this tell me about this child? What do they need, right? What can we access? What's the arrow? Where's the arrow pointing here, right? And also just to show, to your point, Kirby, that a lot of these overlap with trauma, right? So you can have a kid come in with 3 or 4 diagnoses, and ultimately what's really going on is trauma, right? So I just wanted to show this for our visual learners.
Yes. And
Kirby, Jenny, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but would it be possible to put it in slideshow mode just to make the slide a little bit bigger?
oh, sure.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, I just need to know how to do that.
If you put your mouse up, do you see at the top of the screen where there's a kind of the file, the home, insert, design, and then there's a slideshow in the middle of it?
Oh,
Yep, that one right there. And then just do from current slide, and it'll make it a little bit bigger for you. Yep, perfect.
that's
Thank
lovely.
you.
Now I don't have to look at 2 screens. All right. Helpful. See, we learn something new every day. All right. So, and you'll hear me reference this as well. Like a lot of the folks that work at disability rates either have a family member with a disability or they may have one themselves. I have ADHD and I have the learning disabled type. I was not identified early. And so I had to fight really hard to get, to be validated from an educational standpoint. But once I understood what was happening and, other people helped me with coping skills and learn how to really use what, may be seen as a deficit at times, it can also be really helpful to me at other times. But I am a stream of consciousness. So I will say that sometimes I could start talking because I do know these systems inside and out. And I know those because somebody has to, but most people's eyes will glaze over when I start talking about systems. And so I get that that part's really boring, but it's going to be very important for helping your clients. All right. So invisible disabilities are all brain-based. Impulsivity, they just do stuff without thinking. And we know now that the brain really doesn't finish developing in a normally developing person until around 25 or 26. And so then add trauma or add any interruptions in childhood, and you're looking at a much later time than just 25 or 26. We have a lot of people that are chronologically one age, but social emotional, they may be much younger. And so mental illness, we provided you with some really good links here that I think are going to be very helpful. And they just give you some of that background. They will take you very specifically to like how juvenile defenses can be done, as well as, you know, what we see oftentimes during from studies that have been done with juvenile offenders. And so I just want to say, like, really, I think these links are something to be kept and can be very helpful in your defense of clients. Does the child have a disability? So all children have a right to appropriate care and treatment. And we will get to the mechanisms for that. Oh, whoops. I didn't mean to do that. Okay. All disabilities must be considered when advocating for a child. So we look at, they've provided you with statutes that are much more familiar in law than they are in my world. Yes, that's Janu. But the mental health and intellectual developmental disability services are paid for by Medicaid and accessed through the managed care organizations. The managed care organizations in the state of North Carolina are VIA, Partners, Alliance, and now Trillium has combined 3 MCOs into one. So it was previously East Point, Sandhills, and Trillium. Now it's just Trillium. And the map of the managed care organizations looks like a bad test, if you will, because they have actually even moved into central parts of the state that were not typically their territory. It was like really East Coast based. And that is not the case anymore. So we're going to give you that information. It's going to be in here. So that's coming. And those services can be accessed. There's care coordinators that are tasked with assisting in getting those service needs met. Services to address other mental health needs are paid for by Medicaid and accessed through county Medicaid caseworkers. So you may have a child in DSS custody, and they can pay for certain group homes or beds in certain types of facilities. And know this, if the court orders somebody to treatment, you still need the medical necessity unless the juvenile side of this is going to pay for it. So medical necessity means it has to be signed off on by a doctor and they have to meet the criteria. How to determine whether a child you are representing has a disability when it is not visible. The intake process, Medicaid history, school records, and interviewing a parent, a guardian, or a family member can be very helpful in this process. Oftentimes we say, do they have an IEP? Individualized education plan. And so do they have an IEP? If they have an IEP, that means that they have been identified for some type of learning disability. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have an intellectual developmental disability per se, but they have a learning disability of some type. Oftentimes you will see on there that the reason is for other health impaired. OHI is what they will say. Sometimes it'll say ADHD, sometimes it'll say autism. But that can give you more specific information. And to obtain that IEP, there had to be a full educational psych evaluation. Now, if that is done by the school system, I would say it would still be a very good idea to get an outside assessment. Not that I don't trust that they're doing their best. I just think that a very thorough or separate evaluation may be helpful, because then you can use them in a side-by-side to compare. I'm not sure that they have the time sometimes to do the testing in the right environment. Plus, on any given day, somebody could be having a rotten day, or they could be having a great day, and you didn't see them on a day where they weren't. And so sometimes that dual capture can be very helpful to you as well. Medicaid for children. All right, EPSDT.
Hey, Kirby, I just want to interrupt for a second and
Sure.
say, one of the things we see when a case comes into our office and we have a kid that is acting out, we see all these different behaviors. A lot of times, we find out that that kid is in foster care or they've been adopted, one or the other. And as soon as we see that, one of the first places my mind goes is, has this kid ever been assessed for FASD, for fetal alcohol? It is way, way underdiagnosed. It's far more prevalent than you can imagine. And there's a host of behavioral issues that go with it. And so once we know that they're adopted, we'll try to get a little bit of the history. I've been on cases where everybody's talking about the fact that this adopted kid probably has fetal alcohol, and talking about, the birth mother that we don't know a lot about, but we know some about. They're all talking about it, but nobody is saying we should get this kid assessed for this, or we did get him assessed for this. And it's crucial to think about stuff like that, and to think, okay, if I think it's fetal alcohol, we need to get an assessment here for that. And it's just, it happens all the time.
And Lisa's absolutely correct about that. And we have two very specific testing centers in the state, and that's Fullerton Genetics in Asheville. And then there's another in Charlotte, but they only, I think, assess if they are under a certain age. And Janu and Lisa might know what that exact age is, but they do the younger kids. I have an added standard here, because drug effects or fetal alcohol syndrome, we are seeing much more with the opioid crisis. We're seeing a lot of kids affected by opioids, meth, in utero. And when you have a kid that has detoxed from meth as an infant, and then they get diagnosed with ADHD, and then they give them methylphenidate for their ADHD, I tend to think that this is not the best way to go. I don't understand giving them something. There are non-stimulants out there that can also support and help people with ADHD, as well as diet and some other types of changes. But I like to do medication sensitivity testing, especially psychiatric medication sensitivity testing. What we often see in kids with fetal alcohol syndrome, drug effects in utero, and autism is they will have paradoxical or opposite reactions to medications than what they are intended for. So you could give them something that would be, for me, I'd be in a coma, sedated, and for them, they're climbing the walls with it. They will have a very disproportionate or opposite reaction to that. Also, when kids are coming, when their medications start to wear off, you will see an increase in behaviors, anger, behavior, diet needs, especially if they're on ADHD meds. They won't be hungry, then they'll be starving, and they start to get angrier as the medication wears off. So knowing what you're dealing with is really important to you being the best representative of that individual. So EPSDT, what is that? Early periodic screening, diagnosis, and treatment is what that stands for. That is federal Medicaid. So if the managed care organization, if there is a medically necessary service for that child that is needed, then all that has to happen is a doctor has to sign off. Equine therapy. Okay. Doctor signs off. Equine therapy would be great. A lot of times people think putting kids with trauma issues into trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, or TFCBT, is the way to go. They may not be ready for that. That takes insight. It is time limited. It is also not really designed for kids with intellectual disabilities or other varying invisible disabilities. It is 22 sessions, typically 18 to 22. And I have had to do with a fetal alcohol child, I've done 45 sessions. So yeah, I'm outside of what that design was, but it was effective, and it just had to be repetitious in nature. Like, it just took a very long time. And when we got to around 50 something sessions, I started to feel like I was nuts. But something switched for the child. And so one week I went and she was like, hang on, I got to put my laundry in and make a snack before I do my homework. And I was like, I don't even know who this child is. That was not how she was operating. For it took consistency with the same person and really a lot of tenacity on my own part to just hang in there until it clicked for her and she was able to really benefit from it. But I often say doing non-talk therapies first helps kids learn how to regulate their brain. If they're dysregulated in their brain, they're in that fight or flight brain, they're not going to benefit from sit down talk therapy. Plus, they don't usually trust adults very much. And I can't say that I blame them, especially when they're coming out of some of these systems. It is a harsh reality that many of us haven't had to deal with. So the words that they use when you're trying to get EPSDT, there's a very specific word that can be written that gets everybody's attention and feels here and gets it approved, and that is ameliorate. So to ameliorate the condition or treat the condition on an ongoing basis, it doesn't have to cure that. It just has to help diminish the symptoms of, okay? But I'm just telling you, when people are writing plans and they don't use that in there, they're not going to get those services approved probably very easily. All right. So maybe at this point we take some questions. Are there any questions that are in the chat that maybe we should look at right now before we keep going? Janu, Lisa?
I don't see any questions. I think you can keep going.
Everybody's eyes are just glazed over and just listening. All right, here we go. We'll just keep going here. Hey, did I just skip something? Okay. All right, so the MCOs provide access to services. So you may have Blue Cross Blue Shield. They have Alliance, or they have Partners, or they have VIA. Usually if kids are in the system, like in the DSS system, they have already automatically been tiered up, which means that they're tiered to be connected to their managed care organization. Adopted children that are coming out of the DSS system, same thing. They're usually tiered up. Sometimes something gets missed here, and they don't have that, but you can always have it switched from whatever Medicaid plan that they are on to one of the managed care organizations if they have need of access to those services. So they are supposed to be able to coordinate mental health, substance abuse, IDD services. Make sure that if you identify very quickly that your client has an intellectual developmental disability, and I'm not, again, just talking about IQ. So below 70 would be considered mild IDD. This is not the only criteria, and we will give that to you. They have to meet 3 of, I think, 8 criteria. Well, it used to be 8. I think we're like down to like 7 or something like that now, but they've combined some of them. Adaptive functioning is equally as important as what their IQ is, what their, functional limitations may be, where they may have other deficits in daily care. Can they manage money? Can they do, any number of things that would help them move towards adulthood in a way that makes sense? Make sure that they are placed on the RUN, the Registry of Unmet Needs, for the innovations waiver. If they have not been, a lot of times we find kids that are in DSS custody have not been placed on those waiver wait lists, and that is to their detriment. If they have some other kind of more obvious disability, there are other types of waivers that they can access. And we have given you the link here for how those services and are consolidated, so that you can, basically have a general overview of what that individual may need. Now, the wait list for the RUN is extremely long. It can take 10, 15 years to get it. That's why I say you want to make sure that they're on that list. So now we have what's called 1915I services. They've taken the place of B3 services, if some of you are familiar with this, but they have to have a 1915I assessment done to access those services. And those are basically the services that are precursors to them obtaining their innovations waiver slot. Those are given out every year. Obviously, we're a little behind if it's taking 15 years to get them off that wait list. Go ahead, Lisa.
And so I want to add that while the wait list is ridiculously long, right, get your name on it. You can always say no thank you if your name comes to the top of the list and you know, this child doesn't need the services, that's fine. But there are ways to jump the wait list, and that's super important and a reason to have your name on the wait list. And Kirby, maybe you were going to talk about that coming up?
Yeah.
Okay, then I won't bring it up here.
No, well, I mean, I was actually, that's a great segue to this. You can request emergency waiver slots. You can obtain money follows the person. And I'll have to say, just from my perspective, MFP is the money follows the person is very satisfying. You get a response very quickly. And money follows the person. If somebody has been in an institutional setting, hospital setting for 60 days or more, anybody can fill out the application for that individual to get MFP. And what that is it's an involved process to help them get out of those institutional settings and back into their community with the services they need. And it then will convert to a waiver slot. Go ahead, Lisa, and Cap.
Yes, that's the thing. And so you may have clients that get stuck into in PRTFs. The judge may order them there. If they're in there, once they're in there for 60 days, they can, and I would argue if you think they have an intellectual or developmental disability, they should apply for money follows the person, and you can do that yourself. You don't have to have an MCO help you. You don't have to have an MCO do it. Anybody can file the application, and if they're approved for that, they come out with a waiver slot. Money follows the person helps them pay some of the transition costs out of the institution and gets them set up wherever they're going to be in the community, but they're going to get a waiver slot to go with it, and it's probably going to be the innovations waiver. We have a couple other waivers that we work with in the state, Medicaid waivers, but for intellectual and developmental disabilities, it's going to be the innovations waiver. And when we say money follows the person, that is a Medicaid service. That lives within the Division of Health Benefits at the state, and it's part of Medicaid. So.
Hey, Lisa, there's one question in the chat that was, where do you find the application for the MFP?
Just go online and put in money follows the person North Carolina. And the link is right there. It'll give you the instructions. It took me about 15-20 minutes. And the first one I did, I had a response, like within hours, which was very satisfying.
Yeah, and be careful too, because we've had clients in PRTFs or other institutions, and they come out and they may have been in there for a year or 2 years or even 3 years, and they come out and nobody ever says anything about money follows the person. They're not on the waiver wait list, or they just got on. They're now 15 years behind, right? They could have had money follows the person coming out, but nobody thought to apply. The MCO didn't apply. The guardians didn't know about it. And if you don't get it before you come out, you can't get it.
Right.
So it's really important to start that process when you're inside the institution. So once you've been there for 60 days, you're good to go.
Absolutely.
Kirby, I just want to do a time check. It's 1:42, just to let you know.
Okay. All right. So, I just, so how much time do we have left?
You have until 2:15.
Okay. So I'm going to cruise through some of these so we can get to some of the examples for you all. But I will say I did have somebody come out with, we had obtained MFP for them, and the MCO very quickly moved them out of that hospital to a placement. And because they left the hospital without the MFP being fully in place, it null and voided it. So this person that had been on the wait list for almost 15 years they just sort of jumped the gun and it circumvented that process. So you don't want that to happen. So applying for it early is not a problem. You can always go back and re-prompt it if they're in there for longer. So community-based services, facility-based services, they're all laid out here. That the intensive alternative family treatment is the higher level foster care, therapeutic foster care placement. These families are being paid at a higher rate. Intensive in-home is one that you'll hear a lot about. That can be very difficult for clients that have trauma because there's 3 people on the team. It's all like, it's short-term, it's time limited. So I usually recommend Intercept, which isn't on here, but that's 1 person instead of 3. All relationships matter in these scenarios. High fidelity wraparound, that's a service that really supports families, and, you know, kind of keeping the continuity of care. Day treatment is part of the school programs. There should be a day treatment program, but, you know, and they vary in their ability to be very good sometimes for clients, but they have a therapeutic component to them as well as the educational piece. Partial hospitalization, those are usually an outpatient program that somebody will attend. Assertive community treatment team. So we have just instituted that for kids in the last couple of years. And I think it's highly effective because it's an intensive service, has a nurse on the team. But again, time limited, short term, and it's there to stabilize them and step them down to a less, you know, a less intensive community-based treatment service. And then you see the facility-based, there's level 2 facilities, level 3, she's given you all these statutes for those. PRTFs, not our favorites. A lot of times you're just changing the version of locking them up and maybe not getting them the help they need depending on what their issues are. Most of these facilities are mental health based. So what happens is our kids that are in that borderline intellectual functioning range, they go into these scenarios and they just learn higher level behaviors from the kids around them. And they're usually easily led, especially our fetal alcohol kids and kids with drug effects in utero, as well as our kids in that borderline range. They tend to be followers and they can follow the wrong person just as easily as the right one. So really you want to be conscious of that, of the fact that you may not be doing that, this may not be the right place to help them. And if you have questions about that, we can also be a resource for you. Acute care, hospitalization, and then state operated facilities. And so you've got that information. IDD services, ABA therapy, for usually that's for autism spectrum folks, and it's not for everybody, but if they are assessed to be a good candidate for that service, that can be something that if the school system allows, it can also help them at the school to access a full day. A lot of those kids get put on partial days. We see this a lot, and that is not giving them a free and appropriate public education, nor is it meeting, you know, their educational needs. Let's see. NC Start is a really good service. It's a free service too. It's, I mean, they do mostly crisis management. They have respite. They definitely can be very helpful for crisis de-escalation, and also create really good behavior and safety plans for folks. And this can be for children or adults. And we highly recommend using NC Start and getting them on that wait list, because there is a wait. Not as bad as any of the other things that we've been telling you about, but some of them, I would still do that. And let's see, intensive alternative family treatment, the IAFT, alternative family living, AFLs, and the state funded services. So then you have ICFs and then state operated facilities for people with intellectual disabilities. Those are restrictive settings. waiver services. So innovations waiver, the CAP waiver, 1915I, we've covered that. And there is also a TBI waiver. So for traumatic brain injury folks. Have we generalized this to all regions yet, Lisa, or is it still just primarily Alliance?
It's still only in the Alliance counties, so that's Durham, Wake, Cumberland, Mac,
Harnett.
and they just took over Harnett, right? It's in those 5 counties. I think the state is trying to expand it by 2025. So they're in the process of doing that right now. They have to get permission from Medicaid. Medicaid has already really told them to go ahead and they want them to do it, but they just have to iron out all the details. So yeah, it's being expanded statewide.
All right. All right. So I will now defer to Lisa and Janu.
I am back. So as you can see, Kirby is a wealth of knowledge. I learned tremendously working alongside Kirby for the last 3 years. So if anything she said you would like to go through again, please reach out to her directly. She's more than happy to, talk you through how these benefits, and programs fit together. If you're trying to think through what you can, request in disposition, what you might want to oppose in disposition, all of those things, as I know that as you're advocating for your client, you're trying to figure out what the best outcome is going to be, partially it's, you're looking at what that supervision is going to be, right, from the court, but also you're thinking this is an opportunity to get this child and this family what they need. So hopefully they can avoid involvement, further. So I had the
help. Wait, one thing. If you need help interpreting all those testing things, I'm also happy to do that. I can do it really, really fast because it's their board.
Yes. And so just, a little bit on my background, I actually interned during my 3rd year of law school with the Wake County Public Defender Office in the juvenile unit, learned a ton there. And then I have also represented juveniles in JJ proceedings, which is not usual for people at DRNC. DRNC does not do representation, but because my first 2 years were grant funded, I was able to. So that's why I'm kind of on both sides here and able to speak to that. So just thinking through, when you've got this child, you've identified that they have a disability, what then, right? What are you looking for? So you can build your defense. So again, first, just request and review the medical and school records, get them. And again, if you need any help interpreting, that's where DRNC can come in and really help you, nail down what specific facts are going to be helpful. Looking at, if you have the school records, looking at the child's academic background. For example, I had a kid who had a 1,200 page school record and he had not passed a class in 8 years. So he was not identified as having any disability, but when you see that kind of discrepancy, that's a red flag. And I actually presented that to the judge, and the judge just like mouth dropped. And that was a clear stopping point with everything going on. Academic program, is the child in an occupational course of study? Again, that's another red flag. If the child is not in the main course of study, you really want to look at, do they have a learning disability, developmental disability, intellectual disability? That's a red flag for you to maybe pause and do a little more digging there. Medication records. Sometimes you'll get medical records and you may not have seen a diagnosis, but suddenly you're seeing certain medications pop up on like a medication administration record. You're seeing, psychotropic medications. You're seeing, oh, this child is on antipsychotic medications. So just, if you have something like that, take a quick look at that. If you're not familiar with what types of medications are, it's, we're happy to provide a psychotropic medication list for you. The psychological evaluations, those have lots of information, not just diagnostic, but usually in the back part, they have a whole list of recommended accommodations. So that can go to your defense, and that can also go to mitigation if you do end up having a full trial in terms of ensuring that that child can fully access the court, appropriately. But looking at those recommendations and then being able to determine whether or not, for example, in a 504 plan or an individualized education plan? Were those accommodations in there? This is a school-based, issue. Were they implemented fully? Did the school adhere to the accommodations that were set forth in the plans? So all of those can really factor into mitigating factors or to get the case dismissed or the charges dropped to a lower level. Little word about a neuropsychological evaluation. It's different than a psychological evaluation. Psychological evaluation will give you information about like behaviors, cognition. Neuropsychologicals go deeper and they actually give you a viewpoint of the function of the nervous system. And that's where you get into things like being able to tell relative to other child who are in the same age group, how does this child manifest impulse control. For example, I have a client right now who, again, has an average IQ, but when we looked at the neuropsychological, the impulse control that this 17-year-old had was that of a 2-year-old. So that was a big factor in being able to explain certain past behaviors and to be able to get out in front and anticipate future behaviors, right? This was just a child with FASD, and they had that in utero brain impact, and that was the result. So you may not always have a neuropsychological evaluation, but you can ask if one has been done, and that can be valuable. Again, the school-based records, the 504, the individual education plan, and one big question is always, was there a manifestation determination completed? If this is a school-based issue and the child has the IEP, being able to look back at that manifestation determination, although you're not going to challenge the sufficiency in court directly, you can also use the information in that, as part of your defense. And then also, this is a big one, any prior inpatient mental health treatment. Has this kid been a kid that has spent time at Holly Hill, right? Or Old Vineyard or Atrium in Charlotte area? What was that about? What happened? Was a child connected with services after that inpatient experience? So all of that can also be used to build your case, that this child has a disability and that should be considered. Whether to move forward with the prosecution of the adjudication or how that factors into disposition. And then one last thing, and this is kind of a wonky point, and I know DRNT is always happy to walk you through it, but is this minor a Medicaid waiver beneficiary? You heard that term used earlier, but in terms of your defense, if you have a child and you know that this child through reviewing the records, through your interviews, has a Medicaid waiver benefit, you don't even have to know much about the benefit to know that that is a legal determination that that child has a significant disability. So that's all you have to know is just go, oh, waiver, disability. And then you can move from there. Because in order for Medicaid to grant this benefit to the child, a significant amount of documentation has already been provided to the state Medicaid agency or the MCO that the child has met certain criteria to have a significant disability that makes them eligible to live in a restrictive setting. So to live in one of these, residential settings for children with intellectual and developmental disabilities. They may be living at home, and that's the whole purpose of having the waiver. But the severity of the disability has already been established. So that's an important thing to know as a defense counsel. And then these are two examples, and Kirby and I can talk through them together, of cases that Kirby and I work together. So this kind of helps put it all together, all the different programs and terms and how they can all intertwine, and why DRNC is such a good resource for juvenile defenders, because that's we help put all of this together. Once you've at least identified the factual basis, we can help to integrate it. So Kirby, why don't you talk a little bit about TP, our child who was on his way to Cherry or yes, Central Regional.
Central Regional, yes. So we had a young man that I had done just some consulting work on, but it escalated very quickly. He was placed in a home and he had behaviors that indicated that he, were adjudicated. And they were pretty significant behaviors. That is not to say that he was also a very traumatized child, and and had the innovations waiver. So he was put in juvenile detention. They had to keep him in a separate setting because he kept getting beat up by the other kids. And they did a competency evaluation on him. Then they did a second one. There is nothing that anybody was going to do that was going to create give this child capacity. And one of the judges that was on in one court proceeding stated that he needed to go to Central Regional Hospital from the juvenile detention, and that there they would help him achieve capacity. No, nothing was going to make that happen. You're not going to take away his intellectual disability.
Right. And again, this child is one who had the Medicaid waiver. So we knew this child had a severe established intellectual disability. And so again, when you have that, capacity is not going to be restored in almost every situation. So communicating that to the judge became crucial. And also Kirby had worked with the social worker and the court counselor and the MCO in order to put together a plan for this child to be able to leave detention and return to a community in a group home setting with all of the wraparound services that this child needed. So those were the two options that were on the line. Send the kid to Central Regional for an indeterminate amount of time because we knew that that was never going to be achieved. The capacity was not going to be regained. Or get this kid out into this group home setting where the child had a good chance of getting his needs met. And so what Kirby and I did was we worked together on a document and we addressed it to the social worker and the defense attorney. And this was a document where we outlined the proposed plan for discharge from the detention center, explained exactly how this was going to be beneficial to the youth. And we also underscored that due to the prior capacity evaluations that we suggested that they look at those evaluations to take a closer look to see if there was anything in those evaluations about capacity. There was, but we just, put it out there for, hey, you might want to look at this. So we wrote it as a technical assistance document, knowing that it could be handed up to a judge, it could be used as evidence, but it enabled us to lay out these programs and the benefits. And, Kirby reported back. What happened, Kirby?
So I guess they went on and on and on from until lunch. And then after lunch, they decided to hand up our document to the judge. And basically the proceeding was over very quickly after that, because it was outlined so easily for them to see what the plan was, what the issues were, what was not going to happen at Central Regional, and that this beneficiary would lose their benefits from being inactive for such a long period of time because he was held in juvenile detention. We were doing the capacity. And then, so at the end of the day, the judge was like, this is a good plan. Let's give this a shot. And this was, God, Lord, months ago. I can't even remember when, maybe June-ish. He is doing well.
Yeah, so that was a great example where we were all able to work together to serve this child. So that's a great success story. Another example that I have was a child that I represented, and this was a child that was determined to not have capacity to proceed. So I met this child while he was living in a PRTF, which is a psychiatric residential treatment facility. At the facility, there was an incident, and the staff ended up filing charges against my client for assault. Now, he was my client before the charges were brought, so I continued to represent him in the juvenile matter. I was actually able to get a video of this incident, and I knew that there was a good case for being found, for not being adjudicated or for defense based on the video, what I could see in the video. But the bigger issue was that this was a child who was already in a PRTF, which already, in my opinion, puts capacity at issue. Because the reason they're in the PRTF is because they have a severe mental illness and or an intellectual disability. In fact, the child had had a prior forensic psychological evaluation that stated that the child did not have capacity to proceed in a prior incident. Unfortunately, the time had elapsed, so this new judge would not accept the prior one, but I was able to motion the court to do a new evaluation. The first evaluation we got back, this happens a lot. So it just went to the MCO in that area, in that catchment area. They kind of just assigned a person. This person, it was during COVID, called my client, asked a few questions, and basically wrote a less than 1 page report saying, oh yeah, he knows what a judge is, he's fine. I mean, literally, that's pretty much what it said. So I said, well, that's not sufficient at all. So then I went back to court, filed the ex parte motion, filed to get money to do an independent evaluation. The court granted it. So we were able to get a full second forensic evaluation done. And that actually just corroborated the first one. So that actually put my client in a really good position going forward, that we had two evaluations done by different individuals, across a period of time, both basically saying that my client did not have capacity due to the intellectual disability. And also noteworthy, because of the lack of foundational knowledge, because this client had been in an institutional setting for so long, like he had been apart from society for so long, he just didn't even have the basis of knowledge that your average kid that age would have. So that kind of underscores, what happens to our clients when they do end up in a locked setting. So I'd filed a motion to dismiss and then asked for the capacity evaluation. So he was ordered incapable to proceed, and the motion for dismiss was granted. So again, just being able to utilize, the factual basis of where he was, what benefits he was drawing on, and then argue for capacity. We were able to get that it dropped. It never moved forward to adjudication.
And this is LH, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, and with this case, our other contention was, this is a child that was adopted, had a lot of back history and trauma, and also keep locking him in and see how this goes for you. And you're going to get what you pay for eventually. And so our argument was constantly like, this isn't a child that should be locked in.
Mm-hmm.
You're creating a problem because he's trapped and he's in that fight or flight mode and he can't let it go. Like, so there's always, and he's also very protective of other people that he perceives as weaker than him. And so he has this propensity for stepping in sometimes where he shouldn't. But at the end of the day, we all were very attached to him. He has done an incredible job. Once he was on the outside, and he is in like the least restrictive possible setting now, like with a foster parent that's barely a foster parent, and is being successful. And all of a sudden, 3 years later, everybody's like, maybe he shouldn't have been locked in. Correct.
Correct.
That's a good assessment. All right. I don't know why it's not. Okay, there. All right. So.
Oh, and this is just my my reminder to all of you who are advocates and attorneys. If you have a client who is currently in a 24-hour licensed mental health facility, you have a right to talk to your client, and your client has a right to talk to you. Now, the right is with the client, right? So if the client says, I don't want to talk to my attorney, you don't have a right to assert that you need to talk to your client, but importantly, the facility cannot limit the calls. So if your client wants to get in touch with you and you're hearing, I tried calling and they wouldn't let me call because it wasn't my calling day or my calling time, or I didn't have enough behavioral points. Again, that's something that you can reach out to DRNC. Unfortunately, we do handle that all the time. We have to call up facilities, remind them of what the law is, that there is no, there are no conditions under which you can limit communication between the resident and their attorney. So I have interceded on numerous occasions to open up those lines of communication. And then this is, again, just a thought, just to get you thinking too, that I know a lot of your clients, if they are sent to mental health facilities, will be sent out of state. I know, you know, there's a facility in South Carolina, for example, that a lot of our kids are sent to for either evaluation or treatment. And just a reminder to you that our laws don't follow the child. So, so that's another, you know, if you have an opportunity to advocate for your child to at least stay in the state of North Carolina, I have done a lot of research, and actually our laws in North Carolina are the most protective of children in mental health facilities and juvenile justice facilities across the entire Southeast. So if you can try to keep your kid in North Carolina, that would be really great too.
And you can use the PMAs in other states if you have concerns to try to help with disability rights. Arkansas did us a solid on a case. I wouldn't send anybody there. These facilities, it gets very out of control very quickly. So just try to keep them here.
Yeah, and I just want to add, some people think when they hear, oh, my client or my kid has been sent to a PRTF, that's going to be helpful. I'm going to guess that most of the time it's not going to be terribly helpful. There's not a lot of therapeutic value there. And if it's an in-state PRTF, we at least can go in and investigate and monitor. We can go in and check up on that individual. Once these kids go out of state, we have no authority to go into any of these facilities out of state. And one big reason to send kids out of state is once they hit 18, they can't go to a PRTF in North Carolina. If they're going to be sent to a PRTF, it's going to be out of state, because we don't allow that in North Carolina. We don't allow 18-year-olds to be with youth, kids, however we want to think about it. But I do want everybody to think very hard. My kids going to a PRTF, they're not going to come out and be fixed, okay? I don't want anybody to think that that's going to be a good thing. What they're going to do is they're going to come out 3 months later, 6 months later, a year later, probably that much less schooling they will have had, because there's very little schooling that goes on in the PRTFs. So they'll be that much further behind that way. And they probably did not get a lot of therapeutic help while they were there. So I just want to share that with everybody.
Right. And then this is just, I when I was at DRNC up until last week, I would get lots of calls from defenders asking me about specific facilities. My kid's supposed to go to, you know, Bryn Mawr or New Hope, or name the facility. You know, what do you know about it? You can actually find out quite a bit. So there are public records that are posted by Department of Health and Human Services. We have all of those on the DRNC website. You can look and see all of the results of investigations and surveys at that facility. Also, if you have any sort of concern about your child while they're there, again, I've gotten calls from attorneys who, you know, do report that they have concerns about the care that their child, you know, client is getting in the facility. You know, certainly DRNC may choose to investigate that, but you can also report that directly to the Division of Health Service Regulation within DHHS, and they are obligated to go investigate that. And all the complaints that are sent over there are anonymous, so you will not be identified. And then here's the contact information.
So we've got about 5 minutes, I think, left. And I don't know if there's something, Lisa, that you wanted to add to this, or if there are questions that we can answer. I can't see.
So I know we're going to ask a lot of questions. I'm just going to say this really quickly. What we often see is that our kids are being treated for things that aren't wrong with them. And, you know, when a baby cries, we all go, well, what's wrong with the baby? Is it hungry? Does it need its diaper changed? Does it have an ear infection? Is it tired? Like, we try to figure it out, right? And we want to give it whatever it needs so it stops crying. Kids are no different. And if we're treating them, you know, when we're treating a kid with FASD, everybody knows has FASD, and we're trying to give them all kinds of therapies that aren't going to work. It's just like trying to, you know, set someone's leg when their arm is broken. It's no different, right? And so when you have a kid that's acting out and you can't figure it out, there's a reason that they're acting out. There's a reason for their behaviors. We just need to figure it out. That's our fault, right? That's bad on us. We didn't do the right assessments. We didn't get the right evaluations, and that kid didn't get the right help. And so I just want to say, there's no bad kids, right? There are not bad kids. We just haven't figured it out yet. We haven't helped them the way we needed to help them. And so if it's something going on, think about, okay, how do I figure this out? What evaluation do I need? What is the assessment that's going to help me get this kid the right help that they need? And if you think about it that way, we hear too many people talk about bad kids. I just don't think there are bad kids out there. There's kids that need help.
Right. And then I'll just add on that, because I know we're close to time, is that's really where DRNC can help you. Because we get that you have high caseloads, and, sometimes you're certainly not, experts on the systems of Medicaid and, different treatment plans. But as you're thinking through and you have this kid in front of you and you're just like, it just doesn't seem right that, we're going down this road. Maybe DRNC can help me look at something, or help me ask the judge, communicate something to a judge in a way that, can move the needle. I think that's where we've been able to make the biggest impact, with the juvenile defense bar, and really help some kids who otherwise may have been slated to go, be sent away somewhere, like the, the child that we talked about who was on his way to Central Regional until we were able to get some information, in front of a judge. So y'all do a great job, very respected to get in that courtroom, and to the extent that DRNC can help you, please reach out. Like I said, I just this week moved to a job over in the AG's office, but these two ladies right here, and soon to have two more attorneys, they're the best. They really are. So please avail yourselves.
Yeah, email us, let us know, because honestly, we've been able to help prevent kids from going to certain facilities. I don't know, did you put unsilenced on there also, Janu? Okay, so unsilenced.org is another organization. They have a map of all of these out-of-state and in-state facilities with all the violations that they've had. But we've been able to help prevent, like, a child from going to Cumberland Hospital in Virginia, which in my opinion is only a good thing, because it shouldn't be open, especially with the incredible violations that they have had. And we have victims of those, that were victims from that facility. So I can only say that just because somebody says that they're an expert in something does not make them an expert in it. Like we have an expertise in working with somebody with autism. A fact sheet is not expertise. Okay. And these staff are, they're not the frontline staff are not well trained. So just know, like, that those are some of the risks. Are there any questions in the chat that we should answer?
There was one question about, I think the communication slide. Someone had a question, does that apply to youth development centers as well as mental health homes and TRTFs, or is it kind of more of the mental health side?
Right. So that's a good question. So youth detention centers and youth development centers are, they are not licensed by the state mental health authority. So the statute 122C, that is specific to what are facilities that are what we call 24-hour licensed mental health facilities. So your group homes, your alternative family living, your acute care hospitals also have the same rules. So like Holly Hill, Old Vineyard, PRTFs. So all of those, that child has a right that cannot be abridged to speak with their counsel. And if that child is someone who does not do well over the phone, for example, they have a disability, they have auditory processing or something like that, and you feel that the most effective way is to get in front of them and have an in-person visit, that again, that's a right that child has to have access to counsel. And so that's something that we've helped at DRNC. We've helped negotiate that with the facility to enable that child to be able to access their counsel.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions in the chat. But after the presentation, we will send out an email and we'll attach the PowerPoint to that and contact information for DRNC. Just in case you have any more questions. We are so appreciative of your time and this presentation. I think it's been valuable for us all. But before I close this out, I'll just ask, Does anybody have any last minute questions that you want to ask? Okay, well, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Kirby, Lisa, Janu. Again, we appreciate your time, and thank you everyone for joining us on a Friday afternoon. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.